in the past, my relationship with Quentin Tarantino's films has been that I'm slightly frustrated. And it comes down to the fact that I have never thought that Tarantino was a bad filmmaker. I think he's a very good filmmaker. It's like the Wizard of Oz. No, I'm not a bad man. I'm not a bad what is it? I'm not a bad man. I'm a very good man. I'm just a very bad wizard. I think he's a very good filmmaker who has occasionally made very good films and occasionally made films that are frustrating because they're not as good as his films ought to be. Anyway, so the setup, Wyoming, actually Colorado, after the Civil War. We start off with a stagecoach, which is bringing with it John the Hangman Ruth, the bounty hunter, and his prisoner, Daisy Domergue, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh. They are en route to Red Rock, and en route they pick up Samuel Jackson's Major Marcus Warren, who is a former Union officer with a strange past, and apparently a letter from Abraham Lincoln, and Chris Mannix, Walter Goggins, who is this sort of shucks type rebel, good old boy with a real edge to him, who says that he is in fact the incoming sheriff. They then proceed to Minnie's haberdashery, which is a watering hole where suddenly they meet the rest of the people that you assume will therefore be the Hateful Eight. Although actually, I have to say numerically, there was an awful lot. Hang on, is that 9? Many of the, and there was the odd question you asked, because it's being billed as Quentin Tarantino's 8th film. Is it? Well, it only is if you count Kill Bill volumes 1 and 2 as one, and you ignore 4 rooms. You could make it Quentin Tarantino's.
Why would you do that? Why would you ignore 4 rooms?
Well, he only did a quarter of it, didn't he?
Okay. So,
but Kill Bill's volume 1 and 2 therefore has to be one film. Anyway, so they end up at Minnie's haberdashery, where there is an assortment of people, a cowpuncher, Joe Gage, played by Michael Madsen, Tim Roth speaking in a preposterous British accent, Bruce Dern.
Is Sepp Blatter back?
Sepp Blatter.
Is he there? That's where he is. Good old Sepp.
None of these people are trustworthy, and they may all be out for money.
Oh, I see what you're doing there.
Okay, fine. And Kurt Russell is sure that one of them, at least, is there under false pretenses and is there to get Jennifer Jason Leigh's character either to free her or to take the bounty. Here's a clip.
One of them fellas is not what he says he is.
What is he?
In cahoots with this one, that's what he is. One of them, maybe even 2 of them, is here to see Domergue goes free.
Are you sure you ain't just being paranoid?
Our best bet is this duplicitous fella ain't as cool a customer as Daisy here. He won't have the leather patience it takes to just sit here. He can't handle it. He'll stop waiting. Try and create his opportunity, and that's when Mr. Jumpy reveals himself.
And what you got to say about all this?
What I got to say about John Reese Ravens? He's absolutely right.
That's Jennifer Jason Leigh chewing a huge big hunk of the scenery. So, I went into this with I really wanted to like it because it's about time that I really loved a Quentin Tarantino movie again. And there are things in it that I do think are splendid. So, for example, the Robert Richardson cinematography, there's been an awful lot made about this. It was shot in Super Panavision 70, ultra widescreen. Well, it's an ultra widescreen format. It's wider than what you think of a widescreen, which is 235, 239. So it's a very wide screen ratio. And one of the things that's really superb about the cinematography is not only does it manage to capture that kind of landscape poetry of the interior West, which you think of in films like Michael Cimino's Heaven's Gate, but actually most of the film takes place. Well, a good portion of the film takes place indoors, and in fact, although some people have said, well, what's the point of using that super wide format once you get indoors? Once you see the film, it makes perfect sense because it's very much arranged in the frame as a kind of stage play, and in fact, the whole thing has a very stagey feel to it. It was famously performed as a live stage reading back in April 2014, and very much like Reservoir Dogs, which again was a kind of stripped down, almost like a chamber piece. It's an awful lot of it is to do with people in an enclosed space double crossing each other, and the way in which the frame of that very wide screen works actually is equally well suited to the interiors as it is to the exteriors. And I mean, I was surprised by how much of the film was indoors, but I also surprised by how well that works. Tarantino himself has said people saying, well, the widescreen only works for landscapes is just nonsense. Why isn't it that it can't look at the landscape and the architecture of Samuel Jackson's face, for example? And I think it's a point very well made. Second thing is that some of the performances are absolutely terrific. Jennifer Jason Leigh gives as good as she gets as Daisy Domergue. There's been some question about whether the mistreatment of Daisy, who is regularly punched, is misogynist. And I should say for the record that I don't think for 1 minute it is. I don't think Quentin Tarantino is a misogynist in the same way that I don't think he's a racist, and people worry about his use of language. I don't think he's any of those things. I think actually what he has is a callous disregard for all his characters, which is completely nothing to do with race, gender, colour, creed, whatever it is. I just think he treats all his characters equally callously. And in fact, in the case of the Daisy Domergue character, she is, she's as tough and as hateful as the other members of the Eight. I mean, I understand why some people find those scenes problematic, but I tend to be quite sensitive to that stuff. And I have to say, it didn't bother me. I didn't think that what it was leering or exploitative. In fact, the first time she gets punched, it's really horrible, and I think it's meant to be horrible. And actually, that's one of the few moments in the film that has substance. Sam Jackson is as commanding and terrific as you'd expect. I mean, in many ways, it's kind of his movie. He gets one great big showstopper speech, which is deliberately outrageous and deliberately offensive and smacks a little bit too much for me as a reprise of the big showstopper speech from True Romance, which obviously was directed by Tony Scott, but written by Quentin Tarantino, or indeed a similar scene from Pulp Fiction. But here's the strange thing, and it has an Ennio Morricone score, which is interesting and brooding, and at the first sort of rather threatening, and then it has this weird thing that it's kind of augmented with cues from other movies. So we get Reagan's theme, the floating sound theme from Exorcist II: The Heretic, as the horses canter in slow motion through the snow, and that will have pleased. That set an alarm bell ringing for me, because whereas I like da, 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 as much as the next man, you're going, why? And then there are also some cues which originally Morricone had written for The Thing, and actually that's the big comparison, because, and Tarantino himself has said this, that a major influence on the film is The Thing, which is another Kurt Russell film about snowbound paranoia, people all hunkered down together in the
John
midst
Carpenter.
of yeah.
Remember that?
Yeah, exactly. And so actually that sort of works, that kind of makes thematic sense. And then at one moment in it, we get the David Hess Now You're All Alone from Last House on the Left, which seems to have been parachuted in from somewhere else. And then we end with Roy Orbison, which is a bit strange. But there are very, very interesting things and very, very well played things in it, and things that are fun. I've now seen it twice, incidentally. So I just to make sure that I was kind of on budget. My problem with it is this. Firstly, I think, and I'm sorry that everyone's it is too long, that it takes 33 minutes to get to Minnie's haberdashery and to begin the setup, which then basically becomes Reservoir Dogs. And Tarantino himself has addressed this problem that he knows that he's so much of what he does is in the beginning of the writing. I was talking to Nigel Floyd about this the other day, and he was saying he's been quite open about the fact that he tends to write those scenes because they set stuff up and then he doesn't ever want to lose them. And I think that depending on which version you see the film, it's 167 or 187 minutes with an interval. I think, as I have always thought, ever since, with the exception of everything other than Jackie Brown, and of course Reservoir Dogs, which is only 100 minutes long, that Tarantino's work would it be improved by being trimmed down. There are definitely longers. There are definitely sections in which you feel like there's too much. It's just talking because no one sort of reined this stuff in. And like I said, we don't get to Minnie's haberdashery where things really start to kick off until we're 33 minutes into the film, and that feels like an indulgence. The second thing is, and this is a slightly more sort of, it's a philosophical question about Tarantino. There have been some people who've been the whole film takes place in the aftermath of the Civil War, and it has underpinning it a sort of an awareness of racial politics, of broiling racial politics that have a kind of weird contemporary resonance. And Tarantino has spoken about this, and he said actually quite upfront, look, I didn't set out to write that, but it became apparent when I was writing it that these things, about racial disharmony in America are chiming there. And there are certain key speeches which absolutely address that. However, as with Django Unchained, the fact of the matter is that any political sentiment remains utterly secondary to sensationalism, because in the end, what he's interested in is the power of wordplay, the power of cinema, the power of artificial characters, the fact that all the characters in the end up talking in that, Tarantino mode, which is fine. He's Quentin Tarantino. If anybody's allowed to do it, he's allowed to do it. But what that means is that when violence comes, and the violence does come, and it is explosive and splattery, it's kind of effectless. And what happens is that although the film is a sort of quasi-Western and that's the world that it inhabits, as it moves into its later stages, it becomes, and this is again where the thing makes sense, it becomes something which is closer to, it nods its head to Last House on the Left. There's a very clear nod to Carrie, the Sissy Spacek Carrie, in one of the characters, in one of the ways in which a character becomes bloodied, for example. And what that means is that, as always with Tarantino, with the exception of Jackie Brown, it's a film in which genuine emotion is put aside for postmodern frisson. Now, that's not a problem because, surface can be a wonderful thing. Surface can be something that is absolutely a joy of cinema, but surface needs to be really, tight and sharp. What happens with this is it's surface, but it's baggy surface.
What happens when there's a postmodern frisson? What is one of those?
Well, it's a moment in which what you're smiling at, what you're enjoying, is a sort of self-referentiality of it. Like the moment, for example, in which you recognise that that's actually the David Hess track from Last House on the Left. But you're not.
Might not have noticed that.
No, but what you're not thinking of it is I care about that character because I believe in that character. Because in the end, it is much more. It is the voice of Tarantino is those characters, and at one point his voice actually does appear. So I think there are really good things in it. I found it frustrating because I think that there's no question that it's overly long. It is wildly self-indulgent. I think, as always, that what he really needs is a collaborator who will rein him in. There are some terrific performances. It is effectless. Even having seen it twice now, I find it hard to get emotionally engaged with the characters, and you end up enjoying it on the surface level. And my main problem is that, the surface is fabulous. There is great surface in there, but that is not enough to sustain 3 hours.